6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Through Black and White Eyes for this very special show. Very pleased to get Stefan on. He knows his stuff on FFP, guys. He knows his stuff on Newcastle deals. Gets a lot of crap on Twitter for no reason. Don't know why people badger him. I don't get it. You either want to know, you don't want to know. If you don't want to know, scroll on. But let's find out a lot more about him and also what he knows about Newcastle's deals. I'll bring my co-host in first of all. Right. Top right-hand corner is a thing called end stream. Stay well away from it.
Not touching it, mate.
That was hilarious. It was so.
Oh, and and you guys were coming through, breaking up and everything, and I went to hit end because I knew I was going to be in a section where I was just going to get glitchy and fall off. I did not mean to hit end stream. I meant to hit leave, and it won't happen again. I will not touch it again.
I was just like this. Everyone was still talking, and I was like this. Everyone's like, "What's wrong, Baz?" I went, "He's ended the show."
Heartfelt apologies. Won't happen again.
It was brilliant. I love it. Right, let's bring the man of the moment in. Stefan,
Indeed.
Thank you so much for being present tonight. We really appreciate this. Oh, wait there. You're on mute, pal. There we go.
I'm not anymore.
Now
Is that okay? Sound okay?
Yes.
Sounds great.
Perfect.
Good. Good to,
How are you doing?
to speak. Yeah, good to speak.
Good. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into all the nitty-gritty stuff. Tell the viewers, why you're as good as you are and what you know, I guess, because we're very interested.
Yeah, well, that's controversial to start with. Well, originally I was a lawyer. Then I went into investment banking, advising clubs and other businesses in retail, leisure, technology, and then sold City to Captain Shinawatra, and then felt I am a City fan. I will declare I am a City fan.
For your sins.
Sorry, say that again.
For your sins.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, so I was a City fan from from '82. So I do feel as though I kind of earned the good times. Like you guys have had. I mean, I was there in the bleakest days. So anyway, once I'd done that deal in banking, I thought that that was probably as much as I needed to do in investment banking, and wanted to do something new. Because that was the closest I was ever going to get to actually playing for the team. So then went and I've done a few other things since then in terms of running companies and being head of legal in various situations. And so effectively, since I left the sort of professional world, I've been interested in football, the financial side of things because of my background, but more as a hobby. And I've just kept au fait with the rules, and clearly I'm able to both read the rules and also understand the profit and loss and balance sheet. And that combination with that interest in football means that I am perhaps uniquely positioned to give a view. Now, that view, as you know, is not always appreciated by fans of teams that I talk about. But I talk about all teams that have got something interesting going on, whether that's City or Everton, Forest, whoever. But clearly, when the focus turns to a club that I'm talking about, there's a bit of unhappiness. I mean, literally, just as we're talking, I made a comment about Everton and Nottingham Forest's transfer dealings. and it's not even a particularly controversial tweet in relation to Everton. I just think that they should be a bit more cautious. But that comment is something that gets a reaction. But so be it. I mean, it's all interesting, and it's starting to get a bit of traction to a wider audience. So I'll help where I can help. I mean, and it's worth saying, just as a sort of disclaimer to what we're going to talk about. I'm only giving a view. Clearly, I don't have the numbers in front of me for the season just gone, or for the season, the accounting period that we're now in. But you can rest assured that I've looked at all the historic numbers. I've got a very good general understanding of the numbers, and I was probably one of the very few people around who was urging caution for Newcastle fans going into the window, going into June, because my numbers had always suggested that they may well have a problem. And one thing I do say generally, and I'll stop talking a minute because I'm now rambling, but one thing I do say generally is you shouldn't rely too much on what the clubs say themselves, right? The clubs are always going to say, we've got it under control, because it's very important for them from a negotiating perspective to give that impression to the outside world. So just because the club says everything's fine is not the whole picture. I'm not saying they're lying outright, because ultimately most of the clubs also believe that they will sort it out, even if it's on the 29th of June, as Newcastle did. But we know now, in terms of Newcastle and scene setting, we know definitively, because Darren Eales has said they had a very major problem, coming into those last few days of the window. You have to assume that they got there in the end and got to the 105, but they did have a major problem, and they had sort of hinted that the problem wasn't quite as major as it was. So anyway, that's the introduction from me. I'm in your hands, really.
Yeah, it was a really good one. Dan, are you excited for this? Because I am.
I am. I'm very much excited. I'm interested. Having been a football fan for 30 plus years, I've always been interested in the financial aspects of it and how the different rules have changed over the decades. Watching the Roman Abramoviches of the world come into the Premier League and just start buying up things, just watching the market inflate. Sean Wright Phillips worth 29 million pounds. I don't think so, but that's what he sold for.
Well,
and you watch.
I actually did watch a lot of Sean Wright Phillips in 2005. He was worth it. It wasn't 29, and
right.
I think he was worth it. It's just that Chelsea didn't really use him very well. But anyway,
no, agreed. No, but I mean, just watching all that. I mean, and then all of a sudden, the doors get slammed shut after the haves have gotten their haves, and the have-nots are all SOL. So it's hard, and that's why that's the thing that's interesting the most about what's the goings on at the club now. Here we're the richest club in the world, factual. That's no doubt, but we can't spend the money that we want to spend because of the rules that are set in place. So that's where everything gets interesting. And again, going into that end of June and running into the problems that we had, everybody's sitting there going, well, just sell Almiron for 50 million. Well, you have to have a market for Almiron first. Somebody's got to come in with the money and want him. Right now, nobody's breaking down the door saying, here, we'll offer you 10. No one's interested. So let's see where this goes. I'm very interested on the controversy and the Odysseus Elliot Anderson swap. I'm interested to hear things about that. I saw that on YouTube last night, so I was just really interested. So yes, I'm very excited to have Stefan in.
Yeah.
Martin says, "Hey, Baz, great to see Stefan. Top guy, very knowledgeable and a true blue. Keep up the good work." Obviously, Martin's a fan of the channel. I'm a fan of Martin as well. Martin comes on when he can, but he's on holiday at the moment. Otherwise, I would have had him on as well. You mentioned quickly there. You mentioned Darren Eales' interview. Now, I thought that was a very clever interview because it made it sound like everything was rosy while still having that undertone of saying we'll spend to our maximum, but nobody knows what the maximum is. We do have to think very carefully of how we spend our money because of the implications that could have in a year, 2 years, 3 years' time, because of how PSR works. So there's a couple of things I'd like you to debunk, especially for fans of this channel who have been watching. There's a lot of them say, you know, we've just finished a cycle. We've now got a 3-year new cycle. That's not true, is it?
Well, so part of it is true. So it is true that clearly the cycle resets each year, in that the third year back drops off. So, you know, if you've passed through 23, 24, that means that you start, let's assume you start at effectively minus 105 going into the next 3-year period, but the next 3-year period will include 22, 23, 23, 24, the season just gone, and the season that's just coming, and that will be the 3-year period. But you will know that 2 of those 3 years contributed to the minus 105. So it effectively helps you do a modeling of it if you wanted to predict ballpark where you're going to be line by line. And people say, well, you're just guessing what those numbers look like. And there is an element of guess, but every business in the world will model and budget going forward. And every listed business on stock markets will have analysts that will do exactly what I'm doing in terms of projecting forward how the numbers might look, and therefore assessing whether or not the club will have an issue going forward. Now, clearly, there's a whole load of things that we don't know right now. We don't know how much they're going to spend at a headline level, and therefore how much additional amortization they're going to add to their profit and loss. We don't know what wages they're going to add to their bill. We don't know what league position they're going to finish in, but we do know certain things. So we do know that there's a big zero on European TV money, because unfortunately, because of what happened at the end of the season, that's a zero this year. And we know that that was 30 last year. So straight away, there's a minus 30 versus last year. Now at a top line, people will throw at me and will say immediately, well, what about Adidas? Of course, Adidas will make a difference to the top line because they've completely changed. I did a long thread which got a bit of focus, and you know,
we're going to come to that one.
Well, it's got the usual mix of people that are just interested, and those people who didn't like me saying that I don't think it's going to be worth 40 million quid to the bottom line from Newcastle, but it won't be worth 40 million quid. And you know, just on a very simple basis, it would be grossly illogical if Adidas, as a completely independent company, would have paid something like 8 times what Castore were paying for the same rights. So you can assume, just from a commercial perspective, that clearly they're not buying the same rights. Things have changed, and we know things have changed now, because when they went to the Competitions Appeals Tribunal, we saw all of Newcastle's evidence about what they're doing. Not all of it. You know, all of it is a bit extreme, but we saw the full transcript. It's public. You can go and read it yourself. Anybody interested in this stuff, you know, in terms of looking at the fine detail, can go and read what Newcastle's barrister said to the appeals tribunal about their intentions, about that topic. Anyway, you said we'll come back to it, but the point I'm making is there are certain things in terms of forecasting what might happen to the numbers for the season that we're coming into. You can make certain assumptions. You can get pretty close to what it's going to be. You won't get perfect because there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of things we don't know right now. But it can give you an indication. It certainly can give you a sense of direction of travel.
I think what the club will do, they'll have an A, B, and C scenario, won't they? They'll have a scenario if we finish in the top 5, a scenario if we finish in Europa League, a scenario if we finish in the conference, and a scenario if we finish outside of Europe again. They'll have all that projected, won't they?
Well, the problem is you don't know that at the start of the season, so you've got to put together the budget that they've got will have to incorporate the fact that they're not in Europe, and it will probably assume quarterfinal in the domestic cups. It'll probably assume something like 6th in the Premier League in terms of revenue. It'll probably assume something like 400,000 items sold under their new retail scheme. versus a minimum order that they made of 317,000. So they'll make these sorts of assumptions. They'll be kind of mid-case upper assumptions, and they'll formulate their budgets accordingly in terms of the wage bill, the amortization costs that they're prepared to take, and then they'll go from there. I mean, the reality is most of the commercial contracts now are in the bag for this season. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to add another material sponsor for the season. You might get a small one, but certainly whilst the APT, the associated party transaction rules remain as they have been since the Newcastle amendments, and I call them the Newcastle amendments because they could not be clearer that those amendments were made specifically in relation to Newcastle. That's not to say that the other clubs weren't trying very hard to also stymie City and other teams, but there's no question that the associated party rules are specifically related to Newcastle. So the Newcastle amendments that have made it very difficult, I think, and are probably, I would suggest that it is likely that certain deals in respect of the training ground, for example, and maybe the training kit, maybe certain of those deals have been rejected under the APT rules by the Premier League, because I can't see any other good reason why they wouldn't have sold those rights by now to an associated sponsor. So I assume what happened was that they went in quite big, and those deals got turned down, and they had a choice as to whether to effectively wait for City and see what happened with this challenge that City were bringing, or to go back to them and do a deal. So I think obviously if City win, and I have said on Talk Sport, so it's not an exclusive, that I think it's very difficult for City to win that case. But if City did win that case and those rules were ripped up, it would make a massive difference to Newcastle, certainly in the period before the new rules were put in place, because they obviously would be able to fill some of those sponsorship properties with brands that may be coming out of the Middle East and maybe therefore prepared to pay £5-10 million per right that we're talking about. Anyway, I think I've rambled. I'm not sure where.
Well, that's good. It's all good stuff.
Downloaded.
I'll tell you what, how refreshing it is to hear another fan of another club say these rules were brought in to stifle mainly Newcastle. There's a lot of fans out there said, it's to do with the City and everyone and stop teams running away with things. It's like, no, it was because of Newcastle. The other thing,
because of the clout.
I think, because of the clout.
Yep.
It's frustrating.
Yep.
But the one thing I think a lot of fans of Newcastle have got to realise is that this 3-year cycle, it's not a brand new 3 years clear. It's 1 year dropped off. There's 1 year in the future that we haven't got yet, but we've dropped off a 70 million loss, I think it is. So that's how the 3-year cycle works. It's still 2 years back, and it's a year going forward, not 3 clear years now, which some people say it is. That's like, no.
Is that Stefan, the year that just dropped off, is that the second to last of the Ashley years, or is it the last Ashley year?
No, so the year that's dropped off was the first of the new
first year, wasn't it?
Of the takeover. Okay, got it.
That's the point, because what happened in that first year was that you made quite big losses because there was a big investment. So I can give you some of the sort of the headlines there, but you're talking about 70 million loss, as you talked about, and then you were allowed certain allowable add backs for things like the academy, for things like youth development, for things like infrastructure, and the women's team. But maybe the women's team didn't even exist in that year. But the point is, because it was still quite early on in the development, those allowable deductions were also quite small. So what you're losing off this 3-year test is something like a £60 million loss. So where I think you ended up in terms of the season just gone is right on the boundary of the 105, but that will imply that the 2 years that will go forward for that the for the next assessment will be a loss of about 57, but a profit in 23-24 overall because of all the player sales, a profit of something like £12 million. So you'll start the new season with the 2 of the 3 years that we're going to take into account. We're going to start that with a minus 45. So it means, of course, that therefore to still be compliant, you can still lose minus 60 in the season coming up.
Yeah, exactly.
So a net result of minus 60 after allowable deductions. And if you assume that the deductions are going up, incrementally, and maybe you've got 20 million quid of deductions, it means that at an operating level, you can have a loss of around about 80 million quid, which is quite a sizable operating loss to be playing with before, certainly before player transfers and stuff. So there is leeway, but, and I think this is where Darren Eales did a good job, if people can read between the lines. What he's saying is you've got issues because of PSR. Just generally the clubs have got issues. All of the clubs have got issues, particularly the clubs that are not in European competition, and the clubs who are aspirational in terms of breaking into that top tier and don't have, 500 million quid top line. They've all got the same problem, and one of the first things I said when the takeover happened was the big challenge that Newcastle were going to have was how do they break into that top 4 with a wage bill sub £200 million, and how do they get the wage bill higher than £200 million when they've got all these restrictions on what they can put in at the top in terms of revenue and profitability. So, so you've got some leeway, and they can spend, but you can't go crazy. And I think what I think Eales did well was try to just give both sides of it. There are some good things happening. So the Adidas thing is, can be very useful, but it doesn't mean everything's hunky dory. This will be the first year of Adidas, for example. It may not generate any profit at all in that first year.
Well, I hope it does. We all hope it does, don't we?
It will make a difference. I mean,
it will.
The key thing for most of the clubs who are aspirational right now are the selling of younger players, because, if we're in a world where young players who have got some ability but don't necessarily make the first team, if those players can go for 30, 40 million pounds, it's very hard to make 40 million pounds of operating profit. Very hard. Much easier to make that through the sale of a young player that you're not going to play. 40 million pounds of profit in a football club is, a lot of things have to go right. That is the entire amount of money that Newcastle made from the Champions League, for example. That's the scale of 40 million pounds.
And that's why people can be rightfully upset that we sold Minta, for instance, without ever having seen him play for the first team. But at the same time, how much did we spend to get him? 6?
Something like that,
something like that. And then we turned around and sold him for 33 or whatever. So,
35.
It does help. It does help the bottom line, and it's not what we want to do. But unfortunately, a club in our position is forced to do those kinds of things just to make up, just to put that black on the balance sheet, so it's not all red. So, I
was going to say this is the reason why yourselves, City, and also Chelsea are in such a strong position, because of the youth development setup you've got. You can generate 40, 50 to 100 million just by selling players you've never even watched. And that is a great position to be in.
Yeah, it makes a massive sense.
And I think the thing that frustrated everyone in the last summer transfer window was seeing PIF with 4 teams in the Middle East, buying a whole bunch of current superstars or, just past Premier League best superstars, and paying above the odds for them, where Newcastle were forced to sell, say Maximin for what we would have thought was less than Well, but less than market value was our opinion because he was our superstar.
Yeah.
And it was because we were under the microscope.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just be cautious on some of the analysis, because if you actually look at, for example, the Liverpool accounts, and you try and do the maths on what Fabinho went for, it bears no relation to what was in the press. And I suspect that what really happened was that we were getting a lot of quite duff information out of the Middle East, and most of the deals were relatively reasonable deals. I mean, okay, you're always going to get one or two where they've massively overpaid, but I think we get a lot of nonsense coming out of Saudi about what players are being paid, what deals are being offered. If you look at the way that they negotiated, for example, with City on Mahrez and Laporte, those players, I mean, Laporte went for 25 million quid, a fantastic centre half. And, it wasn't as if, they hugely overpaid. They did a good negotiation on that. They did a decent negotiation on Mahrez. I just think we hear a lot of stuff, and I think it's unlikely that other teams did materially better from those sales. Even if you look at Chelsea sales to the Middle East, there's a lot of talk about them. But the reality is Chelsea took a loss on most of those players versus their book value that they sold. Koulibaly didn't go for a particularly exciting fee. Kante went for zero because he was out of contract. So you can get yourself wrapped up in this. Look, I think it's almost disrespectful to the people operating the Saudi league to say that they're just literally going to spray money around, with no commercial acumen whatsoever. I find that very hard to believe, and I don't believe that's been borne out by what's actually happened. I think they've actually been not all the deals have worked, but I don't think they've been crazy about what they've done, and I don't think they will be this summer either. It looks like actually they may be more cautious this summer.
Yeah, we did hear the what was it? Saudi were looking in all the businesses they've got and actually pulling the purse strings a little bit back.
Yeah,
to what they normally do, so that is interesting.
Yeah, that doesn't also pass the sniff test really either. I mean, I suspect, you're talking football is still a minute business in the context of PIF, right? Yeah. So even if you take, I don't just mean taking Newcastle, I mean take the whole league. It's still a minuscule part of the economy that they're trying to build. I mean, these guys have got clearly enormous amounts of money, and clearly they're trying to diversify away from just oil and gas into all other types of industry. But I just think, just as a general rule, to assume people are going to be wholly uncommercial is not a good basis. It's not a good assumption to start with. I mean, look how hard they fought on the transaction itself to buy the club, and they didn't go around paying $1 billion. They paid 300 million quid. There's a piece in the paper today that Spurs are looking to sell 10% at a pre-money valuation of 3.75 billion. I mean, on what possible basis? I mean, forget what possible basis Spurs could be valued at that level. But the point I'm making is PIF did a very, very good financial deal in respect to Newcastle in terms of the investment. They got in at a super low price. So I wouldn't assume, I'd assume that they're smart and commercial, and I wouldn't believe everything you read.
And we've got to be smart to have that kind of money in the bank as well, though, at the end of the day. So
yeah, I mean, it does help having the biggest reserves of oil in the world under your front lawn. So I wouldn't get too carried away about how smart they are in that respect. But But in terms of how they're spending it now, in terms of PIF, the people involved in PIF, the investment, who do you think the investment people are in PIF? The people that they've recruited from all around the world, incredibly intelligent people who have got MBAs, who have been in all the best banks before they went to Saudi. They're paid a fortune, but they're paid to deliver returns. And clearly, there's a political aspect to some of the things that they're buying. I mean, it would be silly to suggest there isn't. But generally, you should assume that they're being commercial and smart.
There was a question for you here. I don't know if you know the answer to it, but why did we wait to the last minute to sort out PSR as it didn't look good?
Well, so once the January window, I think through January there was a game of bluff going on right all around the game. Everybody was kind of making out they had no problems, and I actually sent a list round in early March, that listed the teams that I thought were close to the wire, and sure enough, that turned out to be very accurate. And there was a lot of teams on that list. 6 to 8 teams were on that list, so they weren't alone in scrambling around. Once you miss the January window, you've got no choice but to be scrambling around, because the window doesn't open till June, and then you're out and about trying to do these deals, and people are trying to be smart on the other side. Where they know that you're over a barrel, they're trying to be smart on the deals, and ultimately, I think what happened was that they realised that to try and do a lot of deals with clubs who weren't affected by the PSR challenge was going to mean that they were going to be legged over on deals like, Gordon, for example, going to Liverpool. That fee, I suspect, would not have made you happy. And they ended up with a choice whether either to do those deals or find other teams who were in a similar boat to them, and end up doing these swap deals, which I still think might still get some. Might still cause some issues, but I think they left it to the last minute just because ultimately that's business, and people were leveraging their negotiating power, and I don't think Newcastle were in a particularly good position in respect of it. I think on the other side, maybe they'd hoped that they would watch what happened with the pre-sale of the kits, because I think not the pre-sale, the early sales of the kits, because we know that 30 to 40% of kits are sold in that first month. And it's no coincidence that they started selling them in June, on June the 7th, and not on July the 1st. And that's partly, I think, to try to get a chunk of that revenue into the season gone. And it may be that, I think at the end of the day, those numbers were probably relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but it may have been around the edges that they were trying to do. Then they also had the situation with Ashworth. Maybe they thought that was something where the swing might be between £5 and £10 million. Maybe that could bridge some of the gap. So all of these considerations will have been at play at that time.
Very interesting. That comes very nicely to your question, Dan, about our deals with Nottingham Forest.
Exactly. Yep. Well, and watching the other deals in the league, or watching Villa and was it Villa and Chelsea who effectively swapped some players, or was it Everton and Villa?
Chelsea's a different case entirely. You're going to see some funny things about Chelsea. I mean, Chelsea's a club that I've spoken about a lot. I would imagine what's happening right now is that Newcastle in particular are going crazy with the Premier League, because they've scrambled around to comply by doing fairly conventional things. Although the swaps, we may or may not be able to have time to talk about those, but and clearly Chelsea, on the headline numbers, Chelsea have failed 22
everything,
23 by a mile, and they'll fail 23-24 by a mile on the headline numbers, except for one piece, and that one piece is non-football profits, and they appear to be non-football profits of intra-group transfers, and I know that sounds like something out of a corporate finance manual, and that's because it is, because it's not real profits. It's all it's done is moving an asset from one subsidiary to another, generating an accounting profit and putting the asset in a different division of the business, and thereby generating enough profit to get them through the PSR challenge, whilst Nottingham Forest, Everton, Newcastle, and others, and Aston Villa in particular as well, all end up selling players that I think ordinarily they prefer not to sell. So you can imagine the reaction of those other clubs when they see what Chelsea have been up to, and they won't know for sure what Chelsea have been up to until we see Chelsea's accounts. But in the run-up to that, there's no question these clubs are going to be going crazy, and the Premier League have got a massive challenge on their hands. because they
Oh,
can't,
massively.
they can't keep up with this stuff. You know,
They're
they're
selling
being,
hotels, selling the women's team. It's ridiculous, isn't it, when you think about it?
yeah. I mean, look, as far as we know, they still have not approved the sale of the hotel, which Chelsea claimed happened over a year ago. So it's neither been updated on the land registry website as a deal that's been confirmed, nor are Chelsea or the Premier League prepared to confirm the deal has happened. So, you know, you're in this perverse situation where we may well get an announcement that Chelsea have failed PSR, not for 23-24, although they will fail for 23-24 if that's right. But we still could have a situation where Chelsea have failed 22-23. Now, I'm not saying it'll happen. I suspect it won't happen. We don't know why. We don't know how, because surely by now they should be able to confirm that that property transaction has gone through. But you know, we are still in that theoretical position where somebody could have failed PSR for a season 22-23, which is, you know, obviously crazy.
It is massive. I mean, again, how are UEFA not involved and how are they allowed to play in Europe if they're so close to be over the top?
Yeah, well, UEFA is a different scenario. They will fail UEFA's rules, I think, because a lot of these things are not allowed. But the problem is, or not the problem, but the way UEFA works is that you'll just get a financial penalty.
See, I thought they should be kicked out of Europe, but there you go. That's just me.
I think
it's horses for courses. That's the thing. That's the thing that drives everybody nuts at this point.
Yeah, well, the only way you get, I think, expelled from a tournament in Europe will be these days for things like you know, the stuff actually, ironically, the stuff that Chelsea were accused of historically, these off-book payments, and the stuff that City are accused of, off-book payments, and effectively just making up the numbers. If you do that and that's proven, then yes, you'll be thrown out of Europe. But for general overspending, you know, we know that there are already probably 8 teams in a settlement regime right now. You know, PSG, Juventus, Roma, Inter. I think Inter are in their third settlement regime. PSG are in their second. Roma, I think, are in their second. So this is normal for the UEFA rules. They'll pay the fine, and even the fines aren't that significant. But the PSR situation, everything changed once they started docking points. The whole everybody's sort of outlook on this stuff completely changed last October, November.
And I think that, Stefan, I think that's why your typical fan, your standard Premier League fan, are boggled by why is it that your Nottingham Forest and your Everton's got punished so quickly when clubs like Chelsea and Man City, who have been performing under these rules or under these guises for over a decade, they've got charges levied against them, but nothing's happening in that regard. Well, how was it that Everton and Nottingham Forest were punished so quickly in the same season for failing PSR when we've got these other multi-billion-dollar corporations who have hundreds of charges levied at them and they're not even being brought to court yet?
Well, so let's be fair to Chelsea. They have no charges level up. So at the moment, Chelsea have not been charged
for now.
They remain under investigation in respect of the things that they've admitted to doing under the Abramovich era. I think it is a valid question as to how things that have been admitted can remain under investigation for the amount of time that they have remained under investigation. That's a reasonable question. But in terms of the process post-charge, we don't know what that timetable could look like. So that's Chelsea. City is a different situation again. City's case is, I could bore you on it for many hours, but it is super
very good.
It is very serious. It is super complicated. And if you go around making those sorts of allegations that are then denied by City, you can expect that they need to be given a proper amount of time to defend themselves and for the case to come to a hearing. And the timescales in relation to City, given the nature of those allegations, are not unusual in the outside world. And although people might not be able to understand that from a footballing perspective, that just is fact. I mean, just to answer the point in relation to Everton and Nottingham Forest, you do have situations where the rules were changed such that we had expedited processes in respect of breaches for 22-23. So the rules were set out in terms of the timescales that would be required. Again, those were changes made directly in respect of the City situation. So those are the city amendments to the rules, because this is what's going on right now. Is the rules are being changed very reactively to deal with effectively what certain clubs want to do in terms of keeping their position as strong as it possibly can. So each time, we saw it even with Chelsea in February when they tried to change the rules in respect of the sorts of things that we've just spoken about on Chelsea, these sort of intra-group transfers. They tried to block them, but they obviously screwed up the drafting, and turned out that they couldn't get it through on the vote. So those rules stay. That means Chelsea then can get through another year of PSR by selling maybe the women's team, maybe not. We'll see we'll see what deal that they've done. We won't know now for a while. But I think there's good reason why these situations have progressed at different speeds. If I'm being honest with you, and I'm not just saying that as a City fan. I'm saying that even in relation to Chelsea, that I think there's generally good reason where the more complicated the case, the longer it's going to take for the regulator to deal with that case post charge. And another example, although it's a slightly different situation, is the one in respect of Lucas Paquetá, where we're hearing that again, because it's such a serious allegation, it might take until the end of next season to bring the hearing. So the point I'm making is, if you bring very serious charges, those cases are going to take a long time. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, that's a fair shout. I want to touch on something very, very quickly. The women's team you mentioned with Newcastle. Now, I've always questioned this. Does the women's team's financial bearing count towards PSR to the men's team as well? Is it that general bubble? So if, say, the women's team end up getting into the Women's Super League, then get into the Champions League and do well because they can progress a lot faster by the looks of things, does that then help the men's team to have more funds available? Or is it just under their umbrella and the men have their umbrella?
No. So first of all, it depends on how you're structured as a club. I mean, in Newcastle's case, I think actually in all of the club's cases, the women's team is within the perimeter that's assessed for PSR. So effectively what happens is you get the upside through the revenue. So you bank the revenue, but you don't suffer any consequences of the cost, because any losses are added back in the PSR calculation. So you don't suffer any negative impact from the women's team at all. And clearly, if you manage to get a women's team to be super profitable, then you would have a lot of money going in at the top, and you would have nothing coming out of the bottom in terms of the allowable deduction. So look, the bottom line is they try and exclude it from the calculation, which is why it's so perverse that you can then sell it for a profit and count that profit against your PSR. But it's effectively a loophole that they've not closed, and that they will need to close, and that they almost certainly will close it. I expect in the next set of Premier League rules, they will close the rule allowing a club to move the women's team. But for the purposes of what you've just asked, you should assume that you keep the revenue, but you don't suffer
commercial revenue and stuff like that. That's what I was thinking.
You don't suffer any consequence of the losses. So, but the numbers are small, with the women's teams anyway. I mean, Newcastle's women's team, I haven't checked, but it's probably doing less than £3 million top line. It's just irrelevant.
They won't be doing a lot now. I'm thinking a bit further down the line. Obviously, the one league away from getting into the top league. It's so quickly, it's progressing so fast. The women's team will be more successful than the men's team before the men's team's successful in my eyes.
Sure. Just to highlight from a financial perspective how it's so ridiculous that Chelsea, let's say Chelsea, are looking for a valuation of for the sake of discussion, 150 million quid for the women's team. You know, the thing does 9 million quid of revenue. So it would be the most ridiculous valuation. I mean, you know, a multiple of revenue. If you think about the Newcastle's probably sold on a 2x multiple of revenue, whereas they're talking about selling the Chelsea women's team at, let's say, I don't know, let's say it's 180 million. It's a 20x revenue. Newcastle as a club, including the women's possibility, was sold for 2x revenue, and yet we're talking about selling Chelsea women on its own for 20 times revenue. I mean, you can see why that might not pass the sniff test.
Yeah, 100%. I was just thinking more ticket sales, getting in the Champions League. There might have been a decent amount of money to sort of feed into the men's umbrella. That's the idea.
It's a small bit of revenue, but the problem is it's not profitable. So it makes it, you know, and they take away the losses. So it makes no difference for PSR.
Yeah.
They may change the rules. I suspect they won't. I suspect the rules will be changed when they do the new, when PSR goes and they bring in whatever new regime comes in. I suspect that it would be a lot clearer that the women is off to one side and we're talking only about the men. For a men test, you know, we're doing a male test, male football test. So we're obviously only look at the male revenue. It would seem to be reasonable to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of people have said to me. That's how it works now. And I was like, well, does it not? And it's great to get the answer about how it looks. And again, it's not going to make us rich if we get our women's team into Champions League and stuff like that. I just thought it might have a little, it could have maybe given us 20-25 million extra a year to spend us. You know, that's
it won't be,
best case scenario.
It won't be that kind of money.
No, it definitely won't be, which is a shame, but I thought it was another way.
I guess realistically, the big question on Newcastle fans' minds at this point in the summer transfer window is, realistically, given the scramble to comply with PSR, given the paucity of interest in our sellable assets, what is the bottom line that Newcastle can expect to spend before this transfer window closes? I mean, what is it that they can't? Again, we're the richest club in the world. We can't spend that money the way we want to or wish we could because of rules that have been put in place. We've now complied with the rules from the last 3-year period. What have we got? What can we? I mean, if we spent 28 million on Lewis Hall, and was that counted in last year's money, or is this
that'll be this year's?
No, that'll be last year. They'll have accounted for that in last year, I'm sure.
Okay. Oh, would they?
And
I thought it counted this year because it was an agreement loan to a.
Yeah, so for Lewis Hall, the way they structured the deal gave them some flexibility. So it allowed Chelsea to recognise it last year, which they will have wanted to do, but it would have given Newcastle some flexibility as to whether to recognise it in 23-24 or in this year. Purchases anyway make very little difference because all from PSR perspective, all you're talking about is how much amortization and wages they add. And of course, they had both of those elements in their P&L for 23-24 anyway, because they would have paid his wages, and instead of amortization, they would have had a loan fee. But the loan fee would have been about the same as the amortization fee, so it would have made no difference anyway. So, look, it's very hard for me to give you a simple answer as to how much money you spend, right? Because there's just too many variables. What you need to be comfortable about is it doesn't look like you've got the same crisis building as last year. It looks like you've got more flexibility. I don't think Adidas is the £40 million that it's expressed to be. This kind of, let's just compare the Castore deal with the Adidas deal, and it's now worth £35 million to the bottom line extra. I don't believe that at all. You know, it's probably worth, if it goes well and if they sell aggressively above target so that they get all of the extras, maybe it's worth 10 million versus worth 5 bottom line.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you won't see it in additional revenue, but you'll see it in additional cost as well, because what we learned from that case is, they actually give us some of the prices. We know that, for example, a pair of shorts that you sell for 32 quid, they're buying from Adidas for 16 ex VAT. Right? So we know that the profit margins on these things are around about, I mean, they don't sell any shorts anyway, so that was the other thing that we learned, which was there is a 22-to-1 ratio of shirt sales to short sales. So shorts are relevant, but it's an indicator that generally that you're paying about 50% of retail for the item from Adidas before you get additional rebates. Anyway, the point I'm making is I think they're going to be broadly flat on revenue between the season just gone and the current season. I think that they'll probably bring the wages down slightly from last season because they won't be paying Champions League bonuses and won't be and Champions League wages. So they'll probably have brought wages slightly down. Other expenses will probably have gone up. So they'll probably make less profit than they made in the season just gone before player sales. I would also expect player amortization to be up quite considerably because they have continued to add amortization cost in terms of the squad cost, especially if they bought the goalkeeper for 20 million quid, right? Straight away, that's 5 million quid, 4 million quid, probably 5 actually by the time you add on all the agents' fees. So again, you can expect amortization to be, well, we don't know how much extra, but you effectively, for the sake of simple discussion, you take the amount that they spend during this year, during this summer, you divide it by 5 and you add that onto last year's number broadly. I mean, they obviously will have sold some players who did have some amortization, but most of the players they sold were players that had no amortization. So you can expect there to be an uplift in amortization. If everything else on the profit and loss stays broadly similar, that means the club will probably make quite a big loss for the season coming up. And that clearly will impact the amount of money you can stick in at the top this summer. It just will. So I would be looking at, I would think that they'll probably look at 70 to 80 million quid of
That's what I figured.
Of headline gross spend, see how the season goes. And obviously, if it's going well, then they can look again in January. And if it's not going well, then they'll have to sell heavily again before the window next year. But I wouldn't expect, for example, unless City are successful in the associated party transaction battle, which will change everything, I wouldn't expect them to be spending, say, £200 million. And then the other thing that can change things clearly is if they get some sales. So if you can sell players with little or no book value, so Almiron, obviously, Callum Wilson, obviously, young players, what's he called, Longstaff. If you could sell these sorts of players and bring in, decent fees, that's going to make a massive difference to the amount of money you can spend. But as you've identified, those deals are not easy to do.
Right. No. There's a question there. If you extended Isak and Godak's contract, does that reduce the amortization fee?
Yeah, it will, because it'll spread their fees. So you'll look at the book value that they've got, say, on 30th of June. So let's say Isak, for the sake of discussion, let's say he's down to 50 million quid book value. I don't know what the number is, but 50 is a good starting point. Let's say he's got 4 years left of his contract. So that would be 12.5 a year that would be coming off ordinarily. But you extend the contract so that it's back up to 5 years, because 5 years is the maximum. So you then readjust what's left, that 50, you change it from 12.5 a year to 10. And so you make a saving. It's hard to do that example without showing you a spreadsheet, but it does work. You can reduce your amortization cost by spreading it out over an extended contract. It particularly works well if you've got a player, a very high-profile player, let's say, so City with Grealish, their starting point was 100 million quid over 6 years. I think he's got 2 years left on the contract. Clearly, if we then give him another 5-year contract, then you're taking what's left, let's say, I don't know, for the sake of discussion, 20 million quid, and then you're spreading that 20 million quid that would be ordinarily 20 million a year, spreading that over the next 5 years. So it makes quite a material difference. But it'll be around the edges on this stuff.
Chelsea offered the Brazilian keeper a 7-year contract. I thought the limit was 5. The limit is 5 on amortization, but you can still offer them 7 years. So the 5 years counts towards the PSR, doesn't it? The other 2 years is tough shit. You've given them a 7-year contract.
Yeah, if you're crazy enough to keep offering players 7 or 8 year contracts, you can do what you want. I mean, I think it's absolute madness. I don't know what Chelsea are playing at. All they do is giving themselves a financial liability. Look, we don't know the terms of those contracts. It may well be that the contracts have get-out clauses such that they're not really 7-year contracts and they can be changed to be 5-year contracts. We just don't know. If you want to carry on, I can turn the light on. Otherwise, I'm
one more question, because we've kept you long enough.
In the background.
We could see that.
I know it's getting dark, and we've been an hour. We only said we're going to do a half an hour, so we've done really well, to be fair.
I'm missing Love Island and everything for you.
Brilliant. The last question I've got, and I know a lot of people will want to hear the answer to this one. If and I don't want this to happen, but if we were to sell Bruno for, say, 80 million to Man City, which is what they're rumoured to want to offer, Pep's massively interested into him. What extent of amortization? I say it's a 5-year contract, because that's probably what you'll get offered, 4 to 5 years. What spending power would Newcastle then gain if we sold them for that fee?
Yeah, so you have to remember, whatever he gets at City is irrelevant. So the key equation would be, you bought him for what, 40?
Yeah, 40, yeah.
38. 38 and a half, somewhere in there.
Let's round it up to 40, because there's always additional costs. So people always underestimate anyway. So it's actually probably 45, but let's say 40, right? And let's say you bought him, what, 2 years ago or 3?
2.5. It was a January deal, wasn't it?
Let's say you bought him, well, just for sake of discussion, let's say.
Yeah.
Numbers in my head.
Round numbers. Let's use round numbers.
Let's just suspend the maths for a minute and say his net book value on the 30th of June was 20 million quid. Okay, that means if you sell him now for 80, you're pocketing profit in the 24-25 season and the accounts for that season. You're pocketing 60 million pounds of trading profit. That's going to make a very big difference to the amount of spend that you can have, because that 60 million can be split between amortization cost and additional wages. Now, you'll save quite a lot on the wages, but he's only one player. But what it will mean, so if you ignore the wages, so if you say somehow you're going to sign 5 players that are going to be paid the same altogether as Bruno, then what you could do is say, well, we've got 60 million quid. 60 million quid is the equivalent of 5 times 60 million quid by the time you look at amortization, because what you've done is you've allowed yourself, if you exclude wages, as I've said, you allow yourself the space to increase amortization by 60 million pounds, because you put 60 million in at the bottom as profit. Now, if you put an extra 60 million quid in amortization, what that really means is you spent 300 million gross, because you take the 300 million and divide by 5. Now, I'm sure that I've lost people in terms of what my sort of rambling on this, but rest assured, if you ignore the wages and you do a very big sale like that, and that applies also if you sell, Longstaff for 40 or something, I don't know whether it's realistic or, whatever, you sell a young player. The reality is it gives you a lot of scope further up the P&L to be able to buy players. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do that, because you also end up with a big hit on wages if you start to buy multiple players. But that it makes a big difference. Yeah.
So it's a question that everyone wanted to know, wasn't it? Really, was what money we could spend if we did make that big sale. Because Martin's been saying it for weeks to us. If you sold Bruno, you can go out and buy 4 extra stars rather than having 1. And it's,
Yeah, I mean, so he's right in that you can buy 4 extra stars, increase the amortization cost significantly in this current season. The problem is you're burdened with that additional cost in each subsequent season, and you only get the £60 million profit in this current season. So it bites you down the road. And then on top of that, you can expect the wages on those. If you spend 200 million quid, we all know what 200 million quid of players is going to do to your wage bill. Let's say it's 5 players. Let's say they're earning 10 million quid a year. It's another 50 million quid per annum on your wage bill, plus the extra money that you've stuck onto your amortization. That's an additional cost potentially of another 80 million pound per annum. It might be fine for this season, but it won't be fine next season and the season after, because you're not going to be able, unless they abandon the associated party rules, and they're going to replace it with something else anyway, even if they do, you're not going to be able to ramp up the profitability of the organization sufficiently to be able to pay for those additional costs. So, these are the dilemmas that they've got internally. And, one of the big surprises, probably good point to end. One of the slightly surprising things I thought was maybe they thought about this. I just wonder if they thought about actually just breaching for 23-24 and taking, 3 points, let's say. So breaching by, 20 million quid, cooperating aggressively, admitting it very early, getting the full mitigation for that sort of stuff. And just accepting that they just couldn't comply because they were just trying to, they wanted to build the squad. I mean, they did it a different way, and lost probably players they're not that bothered about. I know Minty, you probably are a bit bothered about, but it's easier with the player you've never seen to be more relaxed about it.
Yeah.
But
I've seen them score 2 and 2 in friendlies.
Well, I did see some Brighton fans saying how good he is, but you don't know. I mean,
you never know. I mean, Riviere looked like an amazing striker for us in pre-season, and then he never scored a goal for us.
Honestly, I just ignore it these days. But that's me being a grumpy old man.
Guy Varsh was a World Cup winner. Let's not forget that. So,
yeah,
there you go.
Exactly. Pre-season doesn't mean they're going to be good, to be fair.
Or in the first game of the season, he could do his ACL and he's out for the rest of the season. You never know.
You don't. Look at Anderson at Forest. He's injured already, isn't he?
Yep.
After we sold him. Crazy. But Stefan, honestly, thank you so much for doing this.
Fantastic.
I know it's took up a lot of your time. It's helped me and Dan a hell of a lot. I hope it's helped the people watching. They seem to have been gripped by it, which is great. We can find you on Twitter. He's got his Twitter handle in his name. Please go and follow him. Every time someone starts talking about amortization and PSR, I just literally put your name in a tweet straight away and say, follow this guy. He knows what he's talking about.
Yep.
So hopefully that'll help you get more fans from different clubs rather than just City fans. And hopefully
more haters.
Now haters. I hope not. When you talk sense, it's hard not to collect them, but at the same time,
Twitter for you, isn't it?
Exactly. Evil place.
I love it.
So, thank you, Stefan. Thank you so much. That was fun.
Yeah, hopefully we can have you back on maybe January or something like that and see what the books are like then. And if you've got any more good stuff from Newcastle, that would be great. But until then, everyone, please follow them. I've followed them for a while now, looking at
already done
about us. Yeah, a lot of people already have. So thank you so much for coming on, mate. I really appreciate it. And Dan, thanks for joining as well, because Dan's the intelligent one out of the two of us, so he got more out of it than probably I have.
No, it did put things in perspective. It does, tend to lend a little bit of more logic about what rules are in place and what we have, the guardrails that we have to stay between. So it is interesting to see where the associated what was the ATP or I'd love to see where that one goes. I'd love to and there was a comment in there somewhere saying, do you think that the other 14 clubs will ever band together and try and get PSR overdone? We'll we'll see. I mean, this has all been fascinating. So I'm thrilled. Thank you very much for coming on.
Good stuff. All right. Good luck for the season.
Cheers,
Excellent.
you too.
Thank you, Stefan. Before I end the show, I'm just going to quickly shout out our sponsors. Direct Pro, don't forget. Yeah, link is in the description. 20% off. The bigger one though is the charity match that this channel is hosting with Stanley Deaf Club in support of deaf awareness. That's literally a week today. I'm going to be absolutely knackered trying to run around a football pitch. Please donate to it if you can. There is a live link on Twitter. There's raffles to get involved with. So if you want to get raffle tickets, contact myself and I'll get you in touch with the person who's selling them. Phoenix Steel have been absolutely amazing. They've donated quite a lot of money. They'll have a banner at the game and I'll be shouting them out for the next week and a bit. But if you need any steel, anyone who's in the trade, they're the guys to go to. So please check them out. Stefan was brilliant, wasn't he?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I mean, here's a guy who knows what he's talking about, knows what he's been talking about for years, and you know, in layman's terms, it's easier to understand. You know, he can start talking about amortization, and he can start talking about spreadsheets and all that business. And yes, where it would be great for to have the visuals to go with them and have him click, you know, line by line, cell by cell, and show us. You know, the way he explained it to us was easier than I think it's explained before. So I'm not going to complain. No, it was a terrific guest. That was a big get for us for the channel. Baz, way to go! That was a great guest, and I hope he does come back in January. See where we are. You know, he may be a City fan, but we'll forgive that.
Yeah, I mean, he's worked for Manchester City in the financial department. So if you want to find anyone who knows the inside football, who knows about the financial side of things, and looks at all the finer details, you know, I was so grateful he came on. He said a half an hour, and we've gone an hour and 5 minutes with him. I was just like, I was getting worried that he was going to get sort of peeved off, but he was just like kept on going and going with all the great stuff.
Fantastic.
I was just like, I'm not jumping in. I'm not saying nothing.
No, and as we watched the sun go down in the window behind him, it was just like, holy shit, he's gonna bloody us for keeping him on as long. So great to see everyone in the comments. Thank you so much. I'll explain the Hobbit door at some other time. So
there is a man, do you know Martin, the Man City fan? He is in America right now.
Well, I assume so. I know he's in Orlando. You know,
That's it, Orlando, yeah.
We had a meeting at Monterey Bay earlier in the week, and I did have to chide the president just a little bit, because I was like, hey, what about that North Carolina team, you know, that plays in the same league as us? And it's like, rubbing elbows with Pep Guardiola and Brendan Rodgers. I mean, their coach got to do a jersey swap and everything, and he just kind of rolled his eyes at me. It's just, you know, it was
worth a try.
It was, you know, and we got Earthquakes playing. The Earthquakes played Chivas last night up in Levi's Stadium, where the 49ers play. That's a 60,000 seat arena right there. So, you know, there's stuff. There's stuff going on.
I love it.
So
I love it. I can't wait.
Thanks. I stayed away from the big red button up in the corner. I stayed away from it all day.
Are you on your phone or your laptop right now?
No, I'm on my laptop, and I'm actually using the mute button on my camera rather than any buttons in the software or any buttons on the laptop. I'm just using the mute button on the USB jack to say this is where I'll go on and off, so I don't F it up again.
I think you're good with the laptop, but the phone is so difficult to navigate on StreamYard. It's too difficult.
And I was driving at the same time. Just a bet when I did that the first time when we got on, I can't remember, it was you and Gary, I think. Well, I had 6 hours of straight driving ahead of me. I wasn't making any turns or anything, so that was easy. I could just, I was trying to find an address. That was just a nightmare. So shouldn't have done it, but I felt bad because I knew I'd signed up to be on the show. So all right, I got to go.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have an intelligent person alongside me to be able to ask the questions as well.
Good to see all of you in the comments. Good to see you, Baz. We'll see you soon.
Will do. Take care, everyone.
Night all.
Thanks so much.
Ta-da.
man.